looking even dumber than usual. "Did you really think you'd be staying with us? Didn't I tell you it was a family trip today?" I had been looking forward to this family trip amidst all the harassment. I had driven for hours, thinking staying in a famous hotel would be worth it. But when we arrived, there were only reservations for my in-laws and husband, not for me. My mother-in-law coldly told me I was no longer needed and should leave. There I was, left alone in the grand lobby, feeling utterly miserable. My name is Rala. An only child, I lost my father in an accident when I was young and was raised by my mother single-handedly. Now 31, I am married and live away from home. I met my husband, Jack, who is the same age as me, at work, and we got married. Back when we were dating, I admired Jack for having strong opinions. I found his decisiveness reassuring. However, after we got married, this very trait began to be a source of my suffering. Growing up, it was just my mother and me, helping each other out. This upbringing made me, if anything, a person who's good at listening and accommodating others. I tend to avoid inconveniencing others or causing conflicts, almost subconsciously. Knowing my nature, Jack, after our marriage, began making decisions on his own, even those important to me. Take work, for instance. While dating, he supported my career, but after marriage, he suddenly demanded I quit. When I didn't agree, he went around telling my in-laws, colleagues, and even my boss that I was quitting. At work, they asked, "Congrats on your marriage, you're leaving at the end of the month, right?" And at home, it was, "Quit already." So, I tearfully gave up my job. Furthermore, one day Jack suddenly decided we were going to move in with his parents. He announced this out of the blue, saying we had to vacate our current apartment this month and start packing immediately. Naturally, I was dissatisfied with Jack's impulsive decisions, but my fear of confrontation prevented me from protesting strongly. Just being newly married, I felt my self-esteem erode every time Jack said, "I made the decision because you didn't." After moving in, even my in-laws began to oppress me. I found myself living in a world full of adversaries, following their orders like a puppet. My compliance led to increasingly worse treatment, and the harassment at my in-laws' house quickly escalated. I couldn't stand such a life and, within a few months of moving in, told Jack I wanted a divorce and to return to my parents. Jack shook his head and mocked me. "Do you realize how hard it is to raise a child alone? Your mom gave up her time and love to raise you, and now you want to come back so soon after getting married. Imagine her despair." "Well, if you don't care about her suffering, I won't stop you." He left, mocking my inability to respond, ending the conversation. Alone, I pondered Jack's words. In fact, my mother recently started dating someone, considering marriage. Now that I was married, she could finally focus on her own happiness. I couldn't disturb that. Telling myself it would be fine as long as I endured, I put up with the treatment at my in-laws for about a year. Then one day, Tom suggested we go on a family trip. This was my first trip since getting married, but considering how I've been treated so far, I expected to be used for chores like carrying luggage and souvenirs. However, the thought of eating a meal prepared by someone else made me a bit excited. At my in-laws, I was always left behind to look after the house while the three of them dined out. And maybe I could enjoy a long, warm bath at the hotel. As I listened to the three of them excitedly discussing which hotel to choose, I did my chores with a small glimmer of hope in my heart. On the day of the trip, I was naturally assigned to be the driver. It was fine by itself, but Jack and Tom, despite having licenses, didn't offer to take turns, leaving me to drive the long journey alone. Our breaks on the way were rushed to fit their schedule, and by the time we arrived at the hotel, I was exhausted, barely managing to pull Mary's large suitcase inside. The hotel, being a luxurious one, shone with its beautiful interior and soft lighting. I took a deep breath, soothed by the elegant fragrance enveloping the lobby, looking forward to the extraordinary time I was about to spend. Having held the steering wheel for hours, my eyes were tired, and my back and legs ached considerably. I wanted to quickly get to my room and stretch out without anyone watching, but I knew these people would probably drag me out for sightseeing, disregarding my exhaustion, just using me as a porter. I sighed quietly, careful not to be noticed by Mary, who was busy taking photos of the paintings and flowers in the lobby. As I waited for Mary, who was happily snapping pictures here and there, Jack, apparently done with check-in, called her over with a gesture. Tom, standing next to Jack and proud of his hotel choice, was smiling in a way I had never seen before. I hurried over to them, pulling Mary's suitcase, thinking it would be nice if the three of them stayed in a good mood during the trip. When I reached the counter, Mary took the suitcase, saying, "That's enough." What followed next was unbelievable. "You can go back now, but be here around 10 a.m. the day after tomorrow." "Excuse me?" Confused, I stared back at Mary. Then she burst out laughing, looking even dumber than usual. "Did you really think you'd be staying with us? Didn't I tell you it was a family trip today?" As I stood there, unable to articulate my confusion, Tom and Jack, who had started walking a few steps ahead, turned back. Jack smirked nastily while Tom tilted his head mockingly and opened his mouth. "Come on, a lowly woman raised by a single mother surely doesn't think she'd stay in such a luxurious hotel with us, right? You should be grateful just for being allowed into the lobby. A first-class hotel indeed has a big heart." Tom clapped his hands, clearly pleased. From the corner of my eye, I saw other guests and staff watching us, and I looked down in embarrassment. Seeing this, Jack laughed through his nose, saying it was useless to cry. "We're a family of 3, so it's only natural we booked for 3, right? You're an adult. If you wanted to stay, you should have booked your own room. Though, I doubt such a famous hotel would have any vacancies now." After ridiculing me to their heart's content, they said, "We'll call you when we're ready to leave, so wait nearby and be ready to pick us up," and left for their room. Once they were out of sight, I felt my strength drain away and I slumped into a nearby chair. Even the luggage, which was only a third of Mary's, felt incredibly heavy. I sighed deeply, as if expelling all the negative emotions within me, and stood up to leave the place. A staff member who saw me getting up came over at a brisk pace and kindly offered me to rest in a sofa space tucked away in the back of the lobby. After resting for a while, I went to thank the staff member, who then relayed Tom's words to me. Apparently, Tom had said that I would pay. But, having seen our earlier interaction, the staff member hesitantly suggested that I discuss it again with the staying guests and combine it with the checkout payment as part of the hotel service. After driving alone for several hours, I finally returned home and suddenly found myself overwhelmed with tears. I cried, not knowing if it was out of sadness or frustration, for being told face to face that I wasn't part of the family and for being belittled for being raised in a single-parent household. I don't know how long I cried, but after a while, I realized something important. I was all alone now. Lonely, but free from people who would criticize my upbringing or hit me for being slow at chores. No matter what I did or didn't do, there was no one to say anything. It was a refreshing feeling. If I was forced to quit my job, I could just start a new one. If I didn't want to live with my family or husband, I could just leave. If I didn't want to trouble my mother, I could live on my own. Feeling suddenly empowered, I blocked Mary's number, refusing to run away anymore, and hastily began packing to leave the house. 3 days later, it was the day my in-laws were supposed to check out of the hotel. Even after the time they were supposed to contact me had passed, no one called my mobile phone. This was because I had blocked not only Mary but also my husband and Tom. Every now and then, I found myself glancing at my phone, but the thought of not having to hear their voices brought a sense of relief. However, I started receiving calls from an unknown number. Curious about the repeated calls, I checked and found out that the number belonged to the police station overseeing the area where the hotel was located. Wondering why the police would call me, I answered and learned that my in-laws had gotten lost in the mountains and were now under their protection. They wanted me to come and pick them up. It seems that the three of them, unable to contact me due to my call block, had to pay their own hotel bill. However, with no car to pick them up, they were left without a way to return home. They decided to head to the train station, but because they had indulged in various additional services during their stay, they had incurred substantial expenses. To save on taxi fare, they decided to walk to the nearest town. However, they took a shortcut and ended up getting completely lost in the mountains. Luckily, they were in a place with cell signal and were quickly rescued, but they were furious, blaming me for abandoning them, as the police officer informed me with a wry smile. Thinking they should have just made their way back on their own since they had safely descended the mountain, but lacking both money and energy, the three of them, unable to contact their quarrelsome wife, asked the police to intervene. I resigned myself to the fact that they were, after all, family, and went to pick them up. Upon meeting, they were furious, but I was no longer intimidated and ignored Jack's mother while thrusting divorce papers at Jack. When I indicated my intention to divorce, Jack sneered arrogantly and raised his fist, but restrained himself, realizing we were at the police station. Jack, seeing the police officers in his line of sight, must have realized he couldn't do anything foolish. He then tried to laugh it off and play down the situation. "Just kidding, are you still angry about the other day? She really holds a grudge, you know." While the officers present started persuading me to reconsider the divorce. But I was firm in my decision and declared that I would leave them there if Jack did not sign the divorce papers. Reluctantly, he signed. As we left the police station, I found myself surrounded by Jack and the others. "How dare you, as his wife? Not only did you not come to pick us up, but you also didn't pay for the hotel. Who do you think provided you with a life of food, clothing, and shelter?" Mary, fuming, demanded I put her suitcase in the car. I used to shrink under their accusations, but now I knew I didn't have to. "You just signed the divorce papers, right? So we're strangers now. I have no obligation to help you," I said firmly. Jack lunged at me in anger, but my mother intervened. When I left home, I hadn't told her why I needed to stay for one night, but she became concerned because of my many belongings and I ended up telling her everything. My mother scolded me for not speaking up sooner, cried with happiness that I had returned, and commended my endurance and courage for choosing divorce. The in-laws, surprised by my mother's presence, openly questioned why she was there. My mother boldly replied that she came to see the people who had made her daughter suffer. But Jack and his family looked down on my mother as they had on me, only laughing mockingly. They even began demanding compensation from me. "You left us in a remote hotel, knowing we'd be in trouble. The worst part is on you. We were humiliated and suffered losses, so we'll demand proper compensation. I thought you must be a woman of low character to be abandoned by your husband, but now I see it's because of your attitude. It's your mother's fault for raising you this way. You both are responsible and will pay," Mary said, directly insulting my mother. Furious at Mary for directly insulting my mother, I was about to step towards her. But my mother held me back by the shoulder and responded to Mary with a smile. You should remember that my husband died. But I suppose someone who expects their daughter to pick them up after such behavior wouldn't remember. Sorry, I misunderstood you. My husband passed away in a traffic accident. My mother replied with a low voice I had never heard before. Startled by my mother's assertiveness and realizing they were being mocked, Jack's face turned red with anger, and he almost attacked her. Then a man rushed over to the tense scene. This man was my mother's new husband, my new father, whom she had married last month. Without paying any attention to Jack and the others, he calmly said, "Now that she's divorced, she's a stranger to you, so let's go home," and urged my mother and me to get into the car. His appearance agitated the in-laws, especially Jack, who was stunned and in disbelief. It made sense, as Jack knew my mother's new husband. He was the manager of a company that placed large orders with Jack's workplace every month. Jack, as the contact person, visited his company twice a month, so they had met several times a year. "So you were my daughter's husband?" he said, clearly recognizing Jack as an enemy to his daughter. Jack, realizing he was recognized, laughed it off and started apologizing to my mother, but my father ignored him. He smiled only at my mother and me, urging us to get into the car before quickly driving away. On the way home, my father spoke to my mother. "That was unpleasant, wasn't it? He apologized to us, but not to our daughter," he said. I realized then that Jack hadn't even said sorry to me. Since then, Jack has been contacting me repeatedly, begging for reconciliation and apologizing. Apparently, my father's company had stopped doing business with Jack's company. Blamed for losing an important client and isolated at work, Jack was at risk of having to resign. He insisted it was all my fault and that I should apologize and mediate a renewal of the business relationship. But my father had never mentioned the business deal, not from the beginning to the end. He had not stopped the deal because of the issues between me and my in-laws. Jack blamed me, but he had brought this result upon himself. When Jack visited my father's company to apologize, he begged the contact person to call my father to the scene and then apologized there. Jack, under the misconception that I had influenced my father to stop the business dealings, desperately pleaded with my father's company's contact person and other employees, begging them not to end the trade. Furthermore, after returning to work, Jack repeatedly made phone calls and visits during work hours, and eventually waited for my father's return home to keep apologizing. Of course, to my father's company, it was unclear why they were being apologized to, and it was troublesome. Jack's actions became known among his superiors. Eventually, Jack was removed from his assignment by his boss for his excessive behavior. This was the result of his thinking I had caused the trade stoppage, and not considering others' inconvenience in his self-preservation. I ignored all of Jack's reconciliation attempts and chose an appropriate moment to change my mobile phone number. This allowed me to completely cut off any contact with Jack, who had persistently tried to reach me by changing his address and number. After spending some time at my parents' house, I moved into an apartment nearby to avoid disturbing my newlywed parents and started a new life. Once everything was settled, I demanded compensation through a lawyer for Jack's violent behavior and unfair treatment, right when Jack had left his job. Desiring to sever ties quickly, I demanded a lump sum payment, which led Jack to use his recently received severance pay as compensation, resulting in him leading a meager life without a job or severance money. His parents, who were always extravagant with money and had decided to live with their son in the hopes of being supported by him, had almost no savings. Thus, the three adults found themselves in a difficult situation. Later, I heard from a former colleague that the business dealings had resumed, and Jack, believing the damage was now nullified, demanded to be reinstated at his company. Jack is likely to continue living a difficult life for some time. On the other hand, having been freed from my in-laws, I started a job through my father's introduction. The new workplace is a subsidiary of the company where my father works, and a position had just become available due to someone's retirement last month. However, as a new employee, I am desperately trying to remember the names and faces of my colleagues and superiors, and there's a lot about the job that I don't understand yet. Despite the increased busyness, being treated as an individual has made my life feel very fulfilling. I hope to continue at this pace, forget about Jack and his family, and move on with my new life. She's not family, that's why he sent her home. How could she say such a thing about my mother? That one's just a housekeeper. This is a family trip, right? Those without blood ties are strangers. She's probably tending to the fields I told her to buy now. My grandfather said too, laughing. My father and I were shocked. Cut the crap. What would happen after his shouting? My name is Hannah, and I'm 17 years old now. I live in the rural area, which is still common to have extended families living together. My friends' homes are the same, and of course, so is ours. My paternal grandparents, my parents, and I live together. Living together is one thing, but what comes with it is the constant harassment. Hey, Olivia, isn't the seasoning in today's meal a bit strong? Well, it might be just right for our son and grandchild, but it's a bit much for us old folks. Sorry about that. I thought I was being careful. Careful, huh? And it's still this salty? Are you trying to shorten our lives by feeding us all this salt? Right, it's common for wives to cold-heartedly bully us frail elderly. You know, the wife in the house next door also. Come on, it started again. My grandparents always find some way to make snide remarks to my mother, Olivia. It's always about something so unreasonable. Like today's dinner, it's not even that salty. Moreover, she's prepared separate portions for us and for the grandparents, seasoning them differently. I tried tasting it, and indeed, the elderly portion is bland. To me, the seasoning is far from enough. How can this be considered high in salt? Maybe it's better not to season it at all. Although my mother, who is used to it, just nodded along, I couldn't stand it and fought back. Grandpa, give it a rest. This is super lightly seasoned already. If you still think it's bland, why don't you taste your own sweat? A kid should be quiet. If Grandpa says it's too strong, then it's too strong. That's right. Hannah, you're just a kid, you wouldn't understand. For us elderly, it's quite strong. Your mother could make it lighter. That's why she's a bad wife. Hannah, make sure you don't turn out like her. Well, I love my mother's cooking. Unlike some tasteless old geezers. I'm in my rebellious phase, so there's no way I'm just going to take it and say okay. Catching a glimpse of my mother, she just hung her head, looking troubled, without retorting. She must have felt my gaze because she looked at me and gave me a weary smile. That tired smile pained my heart. It's not just about the cooking. Day in and day out, my grandparents always have something terrible to say to her. Like how she does the laundry wrong, or how her cleaning is not up to snuff. They even insist that leftovers are good enough for my mother's lunch, and that she should shower last. The list goes on. What era do they think this is? It's like something out of old drama series, these torments. The coldness my grandparents show my mother has another reason. It's because my parents keep their distance from my grandparents' peculiar faith. Instead of Christ, my grandparents worship Satan daily. They seem to blame my mother for my father, their son, being utterly indifferent to their faith. Their frequent saying is, "That one, Satan will drop into hell." My busy father is often away, and I come home late from the sports lessons. During that time, my housewife mother is left alone with my grandparents. Dad, Grandpa and Grandma were saying awful things to Mom again. They even suggested she's plotting something, saying the seasoning was strong when it was clearly bland. I reported to my father, who came home late at night. Honestly, I hate to bother my already tired father with such stories. But as his daughter, I just can't stay silent, can I? Man, happened again? Those two really are something. They don't realize that thanks to Olivia managing the house, they can enjoy their carefree retirement. It's all thanks to you too. I'm always grateful. Dear, it makes me happy to hear you say that. Hannah, you're such a good girl. No, I'm currently in my rebellious phase. It's just that my rebellion is aimed at my grandparents, so I'm less harsh on my parents. That's how much I dislike, or rather, detest my grandparents. Don't worry about it, Hannah. I'll talk to them. Just keep being on your mom's side, okay? My father said, patting my head, half irritated at being treated like a child, but also half pleased. Teenage emotions are complicated. One Sunday, I woke up late and lazily got out of bed, only to find my father arguing with grandmother. Enough already, Mom! My father's shouting voice snapped me to full alertness. Peeking into the living room, I saw my grandmother sitting on the sofa, looking grumpy. My father stood in front of her, and his face beat red with anger. Making her work in the fields on such a cold day, what are you thinking? He shouted. He is a regular office worker, but my grandparents are farmers, true to their rural roots. Though the size of their fields has greatly reduced due to old age. Field work? Is Grandpa doing it? Looking outside, I saw nothing but a white snowy landscape. The fields must be covered in snow. Is there something they're concerned about? When I was just thinking how dangerous it is for the elderly to work in the fields in such cold weather. Oh, I'm starving. What's all this ruckus about? Where's Olivia? Isn't lunch ready yet? My grandfather came in, scratching his belly. Okay, he is here. Wait, that means... Wait, don't tell me Mom's. My mother does indeed help out with my grandparents' farm work occasionally. But it's only during the harvest or busy times, generally, she doesn't. That's what I thought, but... That's exactly it. I asked Mom where Oliver went, and she wouldn't say, so when I pressed her, what's the need to do anything in such snow? Then she really went out. Oh my goodness. Well, managing the fields during winter is crucial. I know that. I'm asking if it's necessary in the snow. Snow repeatedly freezes and melts, messing up the soil. If you don't remove the snow, it'll be trouble in spring. Lies! I remember hearing that when snow covers the ground, it's best to leave it be. You deal with snow before it falls or after the ground thaws. Huh, is that so? Well, it's not the time to be impressed. Anyway, Dad, we need to get Mom quickly. Right, that was the point. Mom, let's talk later, okay? It's unbelievable that my mother has been working alone in such snow. Besides, it's starting to snow again. My father and I hurriedly put on our coats, boots, and dashed out of the house. She was there in the field. Exhaling white breath, her face red, she was shoveling snow. My father rushed over to her, and she gave a feeble smile. That smile again pained my heart. Why didn't I notice? While I was leisurely sleeping till noon, how many hours had she been shoveling snow? Being busy with work he brought home, my father hadn't noticed either and kept apologizing to the exhausted her. Sorry, Mom. Really sorry. That day, my grandmother got scolded by my angry father. You will be the one to fall into hell. After that, my grandparents were unusually quiet for a while. Seasons turned, and summer was approaching. The new term would start, and I would finally be in 12th grade. How about going on a trip? My father suggested. We have not traveled for a long time. After all, it's unlikely to go on family trips after high school graduation. Understanding the lonely feelings of a father, I pretended it was a hassle, but inside, I was excited. After all, parents pay for everything on family trips. There will be plenty of activities to do. Oh, that sounds nice. How about a beach? My rising spirits dropped at my grandmother's words. Wait, are you coming too? I regretted saying it immediately. Stepped on a landmine. What a terrible grandchild. Planning to leave us out. A kid like that, Satan will. She started, and eventually, Olivia. It's because of your poor upbringing that Hannah has grown into such an unthoughtful child. What a useless, no-good mother. She began taking it out on my mother. Hey! I might have said something wrong, but it's not fair to blame Mom for that. Oh, how sad for a grandma to have such a cold grandchild. It's all because Oliver didn't discipline properly. Woe is me. Seriously? Woe is me, she actually said that. Astonished, I decided to give some payback by saying out loud, "Stop joking!" However, she continued to fake cry, while my grandfather nodded in agreement. Seeing the chaotic situation, my father sighed and tried to settle things. All right. How about we go together? Instantly, my grandmother's face lit up with a smile. Despite the troublesome situation, I was also looking forward to the trip. The day arrived. Living in the countryside, the airport was far. After hours' drive, we still had plenty of time before the scheduled flight. It's been a while since I visited the airport, so I wandered off from my family. When I thought it was about time and returned, I saw my grandparents sitting on the waiting chairs. Looking around for my parents, my father came back, munching on something. Looks tasty, Dad. Yeah, this is really good. You were eating something in the car, right? But I was also hungry, so I asked for one. Olivia, you want it? Oh, where's she? With a snack in hand, my father looked around. Hannah, do you know where Mom is? Weren't you with her, Dad? No, she said she'd stay and watch the luggage. We said we'd go for a walk. Hey Grandpa, do you know where Mom is? His response was unclear. Grandma, was Mom here when you came back? Yes, she was. So she was here. Maybe she's in the restroom? But no matter how long we waited, she didn't return. I checked the restroom, but she wasn't there. Looking around, there was no sign of her. Finding it strange, my father said with looking troubled, "It's almost time for departure. Where could Olivia be?" Is it time for boarding already? Then let's head over. Although my grandmother must have heard the conversation, she stood up without concern. Mom, we need to look for Olivia. She's not here, you know. What? Confused, my father tilted his head. I also looked at her. With a malicious smile, she said, "That one's not family. That's why I sent her home." What the hell? My father was shocked, and then my grandfather said with a laugh, "She's just a housekeeper. This is a family trip, right? A wife without blood ties is a stranger. She's probably doing the fieldwork I ordered by now." What freaking are you saying? We were just stunned, whereas they were laughing, unconcerned. Not family. What's that about? Mom's not family, then what is she? What's that? Cut the crap. Olivia is my precious wife. Wife or not, a stranger is a stranger. She's the bad stranger who ensnared our dear son. Right, I never liked her from the start. That's why I disciplined her. A stranger, not working, just squatting in our house, she should at least do some farm work. Let's say, what was it? Right, a neat. Just like a neat. They were chuckling with a vulgar laugh. I was so furious, and my vision turned red. I was about to say something when my father, quicker than me, stood in front of my grandparents and shouted, "Don't mess with me." Yikes! My father's voice echoed throughout the space. In the busy and crowded place, his voice resonated surprisingly far. Without caring about other passengers who stopped in their tracks, wondering what was going on, he continued to yell, "Always just harassing Olivia with your petty torments. You think I don't know anything? I know it all. Yes, I always tattle. And just when I thought you reflected on that snow incident, you pull this childish stunt. What's so fun about this? Ryan, we were just trying to educate that woman for your sake. What education could you vile people possibly give? It should be you who needs to be educated." Ryan, how dare you speak to your parents like that? Dad, you said Olivia was a stranger, right? She is my precious wife. My beloved wife. The most important family to me. You say that my family member, Olivia, is not your family, that she's a stranger. Then I'm a stranger too. You two and I are strangers. Ryan, what are you saying? What am I saying? That's my line. Do you even realize what you're saying, what you're doing? My grandparents' faces got paled at his fury. I had never seen him so angry. It must have been the same for my grandparents. My grandmother looked like she might burst into tears any moment. However, my grandfather gave a wry smile at my father's state. It infuriated me even more to see him laugh it off. Listen, Ryan. Calm down. He seemed to want to somehow control his son, to maintain his dignity as a father. Anyway, we're running out of time. Let's just have Olivia give up this time. And, well, let's just go, just us. The gate close is almost here. And we don't want to waste the cancellation fee for the hotel we booked. What? Wait, what is he even saying? Expecting Mom to give up this time? Whose fault does he think this is? Whose fault do you think this is? My inner thoughts and my father's shout coincidentally overlapped. My grandfather let out a startled yelp. That's enough. If you want to go, then just go on your own. No, you guys were supposed to come too. Oh, I'm not family either, so it's fine. Hannah. As I casually responded, her face showed shock. What? Did she think I would go along with them? As a daughter of a non-family mother, I am not family either. No way! You're family! You have a blood connection. My bond with my mother is stronger. At a loss for words, my grandparents could only snort in response. I turned to my father. Let's go home, Dad. Mom is waiting. Yeah, that's right. I'll call her soon after. Okay, let's do that. Carrying our bags, we headed for the exit, followed by my flustered grandmother. Hey, wait! What about us? What's going to happen to our trip? That's not our problem. Go on your own. And preferably, don't come back. What about the money? If you want to go, pay for it yourselves. No way! Her voice echoed around us. My grandfather stood dumbfounded. Leaving them behind, we headed home, where my mother was waiting. She was seemingly happy, perhaps because we had called from the car, but I didn't miss it. Her eyes were red. There were traces of tears. Those two, I'll never forgive them. Hey, Dad, I've been thinking. That's a coincidence, so have I. While hugging my mother, I spoke to my father and sensed him nodding in agreement. That night, my grandparents, having few money for the trip, returned home huffing and puffing. They could have taken a taxi by promising to pay upon arrival or borrowed money from a police station near the station to take the bus. But they didn't even know or understand such things. That's just like them. I guess it served as a good punishment. At first, they were extremely apologetic, but in front of my mother, they began to grow bolder again. We did nothing wrong. That woman is to blame. But my father had enough. That's it. We're finding a new house and moving out. We're cutting ties. I don't care about your old age. He made an unexpected declaration. My grandparents were pale, but his determination didn't waver. He temporarily moved my mother and me to a hotel and hurried to find a new house. He found a good property convenient for his commute and my school. Dad, you are so reliable. Then, on moving day, please, we apologize for everything up to now. Don't abandon us. My grandmother was begging, crying. What are we supposed to do if you two leave us? My grandfather was nearly in tears. I don't care. With a dismissive tone, my father left the grandparents in despair. Olivia, please. We're sorry for everything. We won't do it again. We'll recognize you as family. So let's go back to how things were, okay? Astonishingly, to whom Grandma pleaded was my mother. After all the terrible things they've done, how conveniently self-serving. Feeling disgusted, I saw my mother take my grandmother's hand. With a bright smile on my mother's face, just as her face lit up in response, my mother said, "Judgment from the grand white throne." Huh? Satan sees all the anger in this world. What are you talking about? The day to kneel before Satan is near. You'd better prepare your excuses. I hope you make it to heaven. Wait, hey, wait. Goodbye. Leaving the speechless grandparents behind, we got into the car. As we drove away from their house, I glanced back once to see them standing there, dumbfounded. They were getting further and further away, and I realized that might be the last time I see them. Inside the car, heading to a new beginning, as I chuckled at the passing scenery, my mother looked at me curiously. "What's up?" "Well, just feeling a bit envious." "Of what?" "Of Dad." He said, "My precious wife, my beloved spouse, the most important family member to me." "Really? Hannah, what are you spilling?" "Oh my, still so lovey-dovey after all these years. Really makes one envious." "Come on, no kidding." My mother, blushing, lightly tapped my head. It didn't hurt, but I pretended it did and rubbed my head, then added, "I wish I could have a boyfriend like Dad soon." Right after that. "A boyfriend?" His pained cry echoed through the car, holding the steering wheel.